This old vanity has seen its better days, so in this master bath remodel we're going to extend its length to make it more functional, which means that this little linen storage closet has got to go as well. The only thing that makes me a little nervous is getting rid of mirrors that are glued to the wall like this. I'm not particularly superstitious, but I've always been a little confused about whether I still have to worry about breaking mirrors and having bad luck. But I guess one way to look at it is that if something goes wrong on this job, at least I have something to blame it on. Because we're designing and building this vanity completely from scratch, that gives us lots of opportunities to get as creative as we want to get. In fact, the homeowner in this case actually designed the vanity himself, and I'm working from his drawings. All the chicken scratch handwriting is mine from taking actual dimensions and making notes to myself to refer to when I get back to the shop. I think he did a nice job on the design. The bottom section is pretty typical, where we have drawer stacks on the outside and sink compartments in the center of the remaining space. This is in order to allow us to place a couple of cabinet towers on either side of the sinks for storage. At the time of making this video, we were still discussing the towers and this upper section of cabinets and how to construct them, or if ultimately they wanted to do them at all. So there is a possibility that we will leave out this center section of uppers when the final vanity is completed. I have a process for building cabinets where I construct the main boxes out of 3/4 inch melamine. All the edges that are going to be seen are covered with edge banding to match the hardwood that I'm using. When it's all said and done, everything that is actually visible in my cabinets is made of hardwood, and the edge banding is covered by the doors and drawer fronts. I'm going to link a video in the corner that covers my full process for building the cabinets and not go into that much detail on the boxes and drawers in this video. So check that out if you're wanting more information on those processes. With my 4 cabinet boxes now on the job site, I place them on a base that is 4 inches tall and is set back roughly 3 inches from the front of my cabinet boxes. This space gives us the finished height we want for the vanity, less the thickness of the countertop. So hopefully I made all of my measurements accurately, because if I didn't, it would really suck at this point to take my drawer stacked boxes back to the shop and have to cut them down, or worse yet, completely rebuild them because I built them too short in the first place. Because of the redesign of the vanity, which enlarged its overall size by a couple of feet, the plumbing for the sinks did not line up with the new design. So we decided to reconfigure the plumbing inside the cabinet units, which meant that at least on the right side, the drain and cold water supply fell in line with where the cabinet end panels would be. Since this unit is a drawer stack, our middle drawer will have to be a little bit shorter. I could use the jigsaw to do this cut, but I find that this multi-tool works so well and gives you such a clean cut that it is often very handy for uses like this. Plus, I always have it with my hand tools, and it uses the same batteries as my drills. So fortunately everything fits, and I'm able to move forward with screwing these 4 boxes together. There is one issue I have to deal with, and that is where we took out the linen closet. The framing in the wall at that spot ended up leaving a bit of a hump right about in this area, which means that on the right side of the vanity I have to compensate for that hump by pulling it away from the wall just a little bit. So essentially, if I'm keeping my vanity aligned straight on the front, then I'm actually pivoting the whole unit off that hump and trying to split the difference that I need to move it away from the wall between the left corner and the right corner. All in all, this works out fine, and sometimes this is just what you have to deal with in real-world situations, because as you find out pretty quickly, all walls are not straight and all corners are not square. So one of the real arts about doing this kind of work is coming up with ways to disguise those imperfections. In this case, all that really means is that our countertop guys will just have to build their template to fit the back wall with the hump and still give us about an inch overhang all the way down the front of the cabinets. For those of you who may have noticed that something is not quite lining up right, yeah, I saw it too. Funny thing was, I didn't see it for a couple of days after installation. This is what you call measuring 5 inches on the left side for this drawer divider and measuring 4 3/4 inches on the right side. Fortunately, it was held in place with pocket screws, so it was an easy fix. In trying to coordinate the various steps of this job, I had the countertop guys set both the deck for the tub and the countertop and sinks for the vanity at this time. This allowed us to get the faucets and drains installed in the vanity, because this will not interfere with installing drawers and doors when they are complete. One more step out of the way. The style of cabinet doors and drawer fronts for this vanity requires a 1/4 inch panel in the center. So I'm slicing off 5/16 inch pieces of alder that I'll be able to join, glue, and sand down to get to my 1/4 inch thickness. I vaguely remember about 30 years ago having a situation with a table saw where I actually had a minor kickback of a piece of material. And since that time I don't recall ever having anything remotely serious happen like that. As I began making this cut, I had the sense that I did not have the blade high enough because I could feel a little bit of lift on the material as I began pushing it through. As I continued making the cut, I came up on a knot in the wood, and you can see how much the material lifted when the blade hit that knot, and as a consequence you can see me flinch. My reaction was just to hold the material in place and let the blade continue cutting through that spot. Had I let it go, it would have been a different situation. The point is, know your equipment and know what your capabilities are. I'm showing you this because I'm not particularly happy with my own pushing of the boundaries in this case, and it was probably because I had the camera running. The type of cabinet door and drawer fronts I'm building for this project is based on a shaker style look. In the part of the country I'm from, this is also called mission style. I'm using alder hardwood, which is actually considered a soft hardwood. The thing I like about it is that it's lightweight, easy to mill, and seems to be a pretty stable wood so that you don't get a lot of unusual twisting and movement with it. I put a straight bit on my shaper and use it as a joiner to clean up my edges, and then swap to bits to cut profiles for my door parts. I'm cutting 2 1/4 inch stiles and rails and then making the cuts for door parts and otherwise prepping the material to begin assembly. So with slots cut for the 1/4 inch panels, the assembly process moves to gluing everything up. I use a product called space balls, which are 1/4 inch round rubber balls that are placed in the slots, which keeps the 1/4 inch panels floating within the frame but also holds the panels in place. So as I'm clamping the doors together, I'm checking diagonal dimensions to make sure the doors are as square as possible. It is not always the case, but in this situation I have the opportunity to pre-install my doors and fronts before I stain and finish them. The major benefit for doing this is if I need to trim or otherwise tweak the fronts, I can do that without having to worry about messing up the stain and finish. The second big plus is that as long as I mark the locations for all the parts, then reinstalling them after they are stained and finished is very simple because all the adjustments have already been made. And in this case I did have to end up trimming off about 1/8 of an inch off of each of these two fronts. So it's back to the shop again for some final touch-up sanding, and then the fronts are ready to stain and finish. This is sanded down to 220 grit sandpaper, which tightens up the grain somewhat, but alder tends to have a pretty open grain, which will really soak up the stain, and particularly with a darker stain, this creates a dramatic contrast across the pieces. If you want to kill some of that tendency, there are ways to treat the wood or pre-seal it, which will mellow out the grain somewhat. But the vast majority of my customers really love the bold look of the wood grain. And it really does give the doors a very eye-catching appearance. For most of my career, I've tended to spray lacquer probably 90% of the time because of its quick drying tendencies and the real smooth finish that you can get in a short period of time. I'm finding that I'm going more and more to polyacrylic these days, particularly on work that's going to have some potential exposure to water. Polyacrylic doesn't dry as fast as lacquer, but relatively speaking, it does dry pretty quick depending upon weather conditions. So I'm finding I'm willing to take the trade-off of a little slower drying finish to have the durability that you get from polyacrylic. And after years of smelling that strong lacquer aroma, it's pretty nice to be working with a water-based product like polyacrylic that has virtually no smell after it dries. I have a handmade jig that I use for drilling holes for knobs in my cabinet doors, and most of the time it's exactly what customers want in the placement of the knobs. But when it comes to these darn pulls that have the attachment screws placed in all these random different locations depending on the brand of pull that is purchased, it is really a pain to get these things centered. I know there are adjustable jigs out there for this, and if I did more of it, I honestly would look into getting one of them. But in my case, since I'm not doing this all the time, I just fight my way through it and end up making it work. Remember, if you want more details on the ins and outs of building my cabinet boxes and drawers, check out the video I mentioned earlier in this video, or take a look at other videos I have on my channel, some of which are linked here to the right. Next come the towers, upper cabinets, and mirror frame to finish off this job.